Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, it's the Friday News Roundup. I'm with CityCast Elizabeth Kama and Megan Harris, and we're talking about an update to Tuesday's SCOTUS episode, an infamous statue that's coming down, and ways to honor and educate yourselves on this country's Indigenous people. It's Friday, October 7th. I'm Morgan Moody, and this is CityCast Pittsburgh. Elizabeth, hello, welcome. You're a very much so regular now.
Oh my goodness. Yes, very exciting. Happy to be here.
Hello. And our lead producer, Megan. Day by day, I don't know how much longer you're going to be with us. So how much longer do we have you?
Theoretically 2.5 weeks, but we'll see. We'll see what the fates allow.
That baby's getting kicked out very soon. I hope it
he's
has a new
kicking me
place
at
to
the
live.
moment, so you're all very welcome.
Pack your bags, baby. If you're a daily listener of the show, first of all, thank you. But you already know Pennsylvania's got a lot at stake in the new Supreme Court session.
Yeah, that started this week.
Correct. Mostly election stuff, but there's also some other decisions elsewhere in the country that could have really wide-reaching effects here, including one on affirmative action in colleges. So that episode was on Tuesday, if you want to pause and catch up.
I did all of my, brushing up on everything earlier in the week. So why are we talking about this again?
Because I left one out, kind of on purpose. There's this big case starting next week with oral arguments. It's about one of Pittsburgh's own, Andy Warhol. First, the facts of the case. In 1981, photographer Lynn Goldsmith took a now pretty famous shot of Prince, R.I.P. She got paid $400 for it from Vanity Fair, and the license stated at the time that it was for their November cover and, quote, no other usage. So Warhol was brought on to illustrate for it. They did that a lot at the time. They still do it now, where they'll take an image and then they'll kind of transpose it into something that's a little bit more colorful or, kind of derived from the same. So Goldsmith was credited twice in publication at the time. But then a few years later, she found out that Warhol had also used her image to create this series of 15 silk screens, the style of the Marilyn Monroe ones that we've all seen on the walls. So that he made those in 1984. And if you, just a side note, if you like either artist,
Yes.
Prince or Andy Warhol, you have absolutely seen this photo. Prince is in suspenders with the little mustache and the dark, moody eyes.
I do know that one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like what we would now identify as that prototypical side bang, the emo thing, but at the time, so edgy. Yeah.
A trendsetter.
Absolutely.
So what's the deal? What's the deal with it now? What's the problem?
Yeah, I'm absolutely feral about this topic. I'm so excited to talk about it. But I'm going to let you finish, Megan.
Very kind of you. So we'll flash forward quite a bit. In 2016, the Andy Warhol Foundation licensed one of those Warhol silkscreens of Prince. That's the one that used Lynn Goldsmith's original photo, back to Vanity Fair's parent company, Condé Nast. So Condé Nast paid the foundation, and note this is the one in New York, not the museum people that are located here in Pittsburgh. They paid $10,250. Lynn Goldsmith found out about it and was like, that money belongs to me. I am the original artist. She asked the foundation to amicably resolve it, and they sued her.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
it's been traveling through the courts ever since. Okay, Elizabeth, you can go now.
listen, I have thoughts. I have so many thoughts. But first of all, I studied art history in college. And so I think a lot about what his work was trying to do and the idea of transformation and copyright. And his work was not necessarily just taking her image and putting it somewhere else. And there's no kind of creative ideas. His work was not necessarily fully about the image, but it was about the idea of commercialization of pop culture and the idea of taking this image of a person and making it a product and making it kind of commodified and what fame does to a person. And the idea of popular culture being almost part of a factory setting. And that's how we determine what culture is. And it's super interesting and super valuable, from the perspective of art and what it means to be art and what art actually is and what it means to be a artists, and I think it's funny because I tweeted about this, and I said, like, I want to see art historians like trying to explain to the Supreme Court like random stuff about like automation and like some like stupid art history concept that I'm obsessed with.
Have you looked at the docket? Are you going to get your wish?
I have, and it has fulfilled every single one of my wishes. There's like an art history professor, like there's a ton of amicus briefs that have been submitted like similar to this one, but my favorite is this art history professor submitted one, and he was like, listen, I know nothing about the legal situation here, and I cannot talk to legal like copyright law, but I'm going to submit a 39-page document talking about why Warhol, like why this work made sense as an artist. And like he's talking in such kiddie language, like such like pared down art historical scholarship language to try to explain this to the Supreme Court. And I just think it's funny because, like, I don't know, art historians talk in words that no one can understand ever.
And I mean, you're talking about lawyers. I don't know that people have a general understanding of that.
I was gonna ask, can I pare it down and ask, Elizabeth, is what you're saying as simply as like artists steal? And that's what artists do.
Kind of. Like, it's like artists steal, but also like it's more about the idea. Warhol's art is not necessarily about what Warhol's art looks like. And I think that's the thing that art history people like paid more attention to, is that art is what he's making commentary on pop culture. And the image itself wasn't necessarily commentary on art, pop culture, and the commodification of fame and the soullessness of like capitalism.
Elizabeth, you sound like you're reading out of the pamphlet at the Andy Warhol Museum.
But the problem is the profit. Like, the fact is, like, that's great that you want to interpret my art and do what you want to do with it and run with that, right? But like, if you're going to use my picture that I took, then like I deserve a cut of that. So Megan, what are the fair use rules? Because I'm kind of on the side of Lynn, and I'd want my money too.
Yeah, well, there are 4 big ones. I'll briefly run through them, but there's one in particular that is really at stake here. So there's the purpose and character of your use of the product, the nature of the copyrighted work, the amount and sustainability of the portion of that original work that is taken, and then the effect of the use upon the potential market. So if you, in this case, the photography market. Yeah. So if we're looking specifically at that one idea of transformativeness, meaning that, you know, the second work adequately changed the first enough to make it its own unique piece of art. And the lower courts so far have ruled that it does not constitute transformation, at least not enough. It has to do more than just adopt the second artist, in this case, Warhol, style. And Elizabeth, to your point, intent doesn't actually matter in the courts. The artist can intend to have all of these far-reaching effects, but first of all, we don't know actually what Warhol wanted to accomplish with this specific series because he's dead and Prince is dead. And Lynn Goldsmith is in her 70s. So this is like a long-standing conversation.
The fact that intent doesn't matter is like a little bit shocking to me, because as an art historian, intent is basically like 90% of what matters.
Which is perfect for the art world, but I can see why in a court of law it would be like, you know, well, I didn't intend to break the law, but you might have, and you might have to suffer the consequences of that.
I guess. I don't know. I'm still on the Warhol side of this just because I see what he did as valuable. But you know whose side I'm on? I'm the side of that art history professor who sent that brief that said he had no clue about the legal right, but he was going to talk for 39 pages about how much he liked Warhol. So.
Yeah, I feel that. The other thing, and I think this is important, and I've seen a lot of Pittsburgh photographers actually sort of pick up this argument in various ways too, is that, you know, Lynn Goldsmith's broader argument is that market piece, meaning that like artists, critics, if the public disagrees about what art signifies, then they can just outright steal their work and not have to copyright. Which happens all the time on social media. All the time. Yeah, there's a City Paper photographer, Jared Wickerham, who's so talented, and he has a photo stolen every few months. And he sends them a cease and desist, and he asks them to please pay me now because you took my photo.
Yeah, on top of his feed of amazing photos, I feel like I do probably at least every other week see him have to post something that says like this publication.
Please don't steal pictures.
Yeah, or, you know, or if you're going to take it, pay me. Pittsburgh has some of the best glass art in the country. And Studio Glass Company carries on that tradition of truly beautiful, handmade decorative glass. The Etsy shop offers contemporary glass art for your home or business. Studio Glass Company is locally operated by Dan Buchanan, who's also the artist behind the beautiful original artwork in the online store at etsy.com/shop/Studio Glass Co. Dan says Pittsburgh's historic tradition for production glass inspires a lot of what the shop creates, including tile, tableware, and lighting at Studio Glass Company on Etsy. The designs at etsy.com/shop/Studio Glass Co. are steeped in this tradition, but are deeply influenced by contemporary technologies that incorporate new processes and materials like powder printing on glass, which, if you're new to all this like me, looks a little like screen printing on glass. So remember the name Studio Glass Company, where you can get locally inspired, handmade, decorative art glass at etsy.com/shop/Studio Glass Co. Speaking of theft, I remember teachers telling us stories about, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria rolling up to the shores of the Americas in 1492.
Wasn't it so romantic, the complete lies and fabrications or glossed over truth that they told us as kids?
They made it seem so nice. They left out the brutal killing of people, the indigenous people, to take the land, which leads us to
belong to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Leads us to where we're at today. A judge has ruled that the Columbus statue in Schenley Park, which some of us knew was there, some of us did not, can be removed. If you've been past there in the last couple of years, you may have noticed it's been covered in plastic since 2020.
I'm glad they finally made a choice. Yeah, his face has been covered for all this time.
I mean, how did it get here in the first place?
It is very awkwardly covered, but it's it's been up there since 1955. But City Council passed some sort of ordinance that allowed it to actually be there and stay and be displayed in 1958. So, not long, but honestly long enough. During the summer of 2020, when, protesters were pulling down statues and government realized some of these are a little bit offensive, and systemically racist, they decided to cover it up. So, because they were literally coming down either by the people or by the government. So a petition was filed with the city in 2020 to remove the statue. Bill Peduto, in his last stretch, said, yeah, take it down.
Mm-hmm.
The Pittsburgh Art Commission voted, and they're like, yeah, take it down, But the Italian Sons and Daughters of America, who it's like an earlier iteration ended up paying for the commission of this statue in the first place, filed an emergency injunction to stop it. And it's been in this legal limbo ever since.
Yeah, I mean, didn't they include Mayor Peduto on their complaint?
Yeah, I think so. The lawsuits, gosh, what was it? The plaintiffs argued that removing the statue, I think they violated an ordinance from way, way back, several decades, that the city didn't hold a fair and public hearing over the statue's removal.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting. I guess they thought that Peduto improperly influenced the city's art commission to remove the statue.
Look, you got to fight fire with fire.
I guess. I don't know. I mean, Peduto was wont to influence things his way, but so is every politician. I don't know.
Yeah.
Every single politician. The judge ended up saying, the mayor is elected by residents of Pittsburgh and entrusted with the duty of effectuating speech that reflects the will and ideals of the voters. It is contrary to law and public policy to decide otherwise. So the judge basically found that the plaintiff, nothing—
The sons and daughters.
The sons and daughters, it's not supported by either fact or law. And instead, the lawsuit is an improper interference with the city of Pittsburgh's right to speech. So if the city wants to take it down, basically, they can do that.
Yeah, they have the right to not say something by having that statue up.
And it's offensive. And it's offensive to, a community that is a part of Pittsburgh and certainly was here long before any of us were here. So I did some digging, though.
Oh.
AKA, yeah, right. My digging is a very light Google search.
Okay.
But I did,
Got to start somewhere.
I guess start somewhere, and it turned up results. I found out who the attorney is representing the plaintiffs, so the Italian Sons and Daughters of America. And let me tell you, this is the guy you want to hire if you're looking to keep an offensive, murderous, colonizing figure where you put it. George Bachetto. I feel like I'm reading this literally like this man's fight card.
Yeah, we should have the WWE like sound effects going,
Ding,
like
ding.
woo, woo, woo.
Yeah. Bachetto is an attorney in Philly. Shout out to our CityCast Philly team. He's a Republican. He ran in the primaries for U.S. Senate in May. He did not win.
Obviously, Dr. Oz did.
We got Dr. Oz on the other end holding things up for the Republicans. He's worked on controversial cases such as this one. He is on the case right now in Philly to stop the removal of their Christopher Columbus statues in South Philly in Marconi Plaza. So now
he's being a good Italian son on both sides of the state.
I mean, so far he's lost one, right? But he also said he's going to appeal it.
Yeah,
so,
I was about to say there's an appeal coming, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I should say I also got all of this information from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and this was a fun read.
We'll link to it in the show notes then.
Yeah.
So is what's happening with the actual statue? Like, do we know when it's coming down, or like what's happening with that?
Yeah, no official word yet, but a spokesperson for Mayor Gainey's office said they are looking into next steps. But, that parade is still coming up this weekend in Bloomfield like it does pretty much every other year. So, even though the statue's coming down, the parade still stands.
Well, if you do not want to celebrate our still federal holiday of Columbus Day, you can instead honor Indigenous Peoples Day. And we've got a few ideas as to how one could do that.
Yeah. I mean, like, speaking of statues, did you guys know that we actually have 2 statues in Pittsburgh to the Seneca leader who is in charge of this region, Gayasuda?
Yeah, there's the one on, is it Grandview in Mount Washington? But I don't know where the other one is.
The other one is actually in my neck of the woods in Sharpsburg. And so it's actually, he lived and ruled right in between Sharpsburg and Aspinwall. So right where that Highland Park Bridge, I-81, that's his land. And that's where he used to rule. So there is one in Sharpsburg. But
can I ask though, is that figure, I always see it, and every time there's a Monday Night Football game.
Yes,
that's
always the one. That's the Mount Washington
one.
The
one, yes.
Well, because it's on Mount Washington, so you have that
it's
perfect
a
view of the stadium right between their faces.
Is it problematic though? Because I can't imagine, knowing what we know, I find it hard to believe that there was a world that Native Americans were living peacefully alongside white men.
The likes of George Washington. The whole statue feels a little like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like they're like joshing or having a beer, like they're staring intently into each other's eyes.
Yes.
It kind of looks like a really intense like second date.
It's an intense kneel and crouch. Yes.
I mean, I think, I don't like the fact that people refer to him as an Indian scout and not by his name, because Gayasuda had a lot of power. And like you talk about what we know as the Iroquois Confederacy, which is actually the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. That's the proper use of it. We had the Seneca peoples in our region. But long story short, they had like a huge role. George Washington had to go and meet with Gayasuda before he came to Pittsburgh. Like in the French and Indian War, they were a huge part. That Indian was a part of that. They were like an actual force in this region. And
one can make the argument that George Washington was barely more than a scout himself until just right before that. I know we know him as like the first president of the United States, but like his earliest positions were actually like quite small, like prominent for the day. But I mean, calling even George Washington a scout would have been appropriate not too long before. Like,
you're making it sound like he was just around. You filled the job, like they needed a president.
He was a land surveyor. That was how he got started.
I think my perspective on the statue is I think it's actually good if you kind of give Gayasuda the respect he deserves, because he was a prominent leader. He was equally prominent as George Washington in those early days, probably more prominent when George Washington was a land surveyor. So having them interacting, one of our biggest, historical figures in America and one of the most powerful Native figures in this region, I think that's great. I think it's good that we're acknowledging his history because, at least for me, I wasn't taught any real Native history about this area when I was in high school or growing up here. What about you guys?
No.
Yeah. Everything I know is based on what is freely available at the Heinz History Center right now. Although I, of course, did not grow up here. So maybe it's different for kids who grew up through the public school system.
Even in Catholic school, I don't feel like I got any real level of that education. It was more the nicer side of things, the whitewash side of things, right? That this was a meeting and we know that that's not true.
Yeah. Well, Elizabeth, you spoke to a leader with the Council of Three Rivers American Indian Center more recently, right? About like kind of ways that they're honoring and more about, exactly whose land we're on.
Yeah, no, I spoke with Miguel Sage. He's a board member, and then he also is a speaker for them, and then he's also involved in the land acknowledgement. So, all three.
Hands in a lot of jars.
Yes. And so he shared a lot with me, and honestly, there was too much to include here. So we're going to talk about it on Tuesday after the holiday, but I do have some stuff for our listeners who want to, celebrate it during the actual day.
Cool. What can we do?
Yeah. So, I mean, the best way to really celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day is to get educated. And, yesterday we put something in our newsletter, actually with a bunch of resources. But we also have a reading list. And, one of my favorite books about the city is An Alternative History of Pittsburgh by Ed Simon. It has a lot of good info. And then I also highly recommend Custard Died for Your Sins, an Indian Manifesto by Vine Deloria. It's really great if you just want to read up on Native activism and, Native worldviews.
Can I add one too? I read it last year during like the holiday season, and it's an excellent accompaniment, like especially headed into Thanksgiving and more myths that we're poorly taught. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass, is really good, by Robin Wall Camarera. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but it's just phenomenal, especially kind of going into that time of year.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, certainly. So read up, visit the statues of Gayasuda, pay your respects. I mean, it's his land that we're on, and get educated. We'll help more with that on Tuesday. And enjoy the holiday.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. Our lead producer is Megan Harris. Francesca DeBecco writes our newsletter. Mallory Falk and Elizabeth Kama are our producers. And I'm your host, Morgan Moody. Music is by Benji. We'll be back on Tuesday with more news from around the city. So we'll see you then.
Elizabeth, you cannot yell into your phone.
I'm sorry. I just got so excited.
You are a producer. You know better.
I feel like a shamed puppy.